administration. And what it literally did was bring power to rural America.
Right.
We'd had electricity in the country for more than 50 years, but the private sector was not delivering electricity to the hill country, to poor, like hardscrabble farmers. And what the New Deal did, they used a combination of private actors and public actors to create these co-ops that brought, and Robert Caro's telling, I really recommend people read this book, brought people into the 20th century from the Stone Age, effectively. People were like, didn't have power, now they have power. That is a vision of broad left liberalism that delivered for people and really mattered and got over the actual like objections and things that wouldn't make that happen. So rooting abundance in this story of like, wow, like it used to be that we had like a majoritarian left liberal politics that could fundamentally change people's lives by delivering them things that are powered by technology, that are powered by different forms of like organizing, and when the private sector or the public sector can't get it done, that's really what I want abundance to be rooted in. And I think the first chapter of the book that would be pitched to the left would be rooted not in the future in a way that people aren't really bought into, but just in the like, why was it that 1930s liberalism could deliver? But if you asked basically anyone, they would say that like New York, California, et cetera, all these like bastions of like left liberalism can't really deliver. That's why I want abundance to be rooted in.
I think the whole country can't deliver, though. I mean, I am perfectly willing and happy to admit I'm in favor of, zoning reform, that there are, ways that the Texas housing zoning policy is superior to the California zoning policy. But I feel like the differences between Texas and California are less important than the differences between America now and America during the New Deal, as you're laying out. And so, I was telling you before, I feel a little bit gaslit on abundance, because sometimes it'll be pitched to me this way of like, we're just talking about the New Deal. Like, you like the New Deal, right, bro? And I'm like, yeah, I like the New Deal. And then other times it's pitched like, screw Zoran Mondani, and we just need to, effectively, like, abundance is just a new pitch for neoliberalism, where we get the regulators out of the way and these out-of-touch do-gooder liberals so that the big business can do their thing. And it can't be both of these things. So there is a part there, the goals of abundance, who could disagree with, right? Building more stuff, building more housing, making housing more affordable, actually being able to do the high-speed rail, like really building out. And this is where there's another, I think, tension within abundance, like really building out the capability to move into a green energy future. But to your point about there's this other part of abundance that also is very fossil fuel aligned and is, exists in the Trump administration, which does not actually want that green energy future. It certainly starts to feel like, okay, this is being used, whatever the intentions of, various people in the movement are, it's being used as a way to stop a shift in the Democratic Party that would otherwise organically happen, and that you see happening towards, a framing around corporate power and checking oligarchy. And so that's where the concern comes in, is that you've got this moment, you have this reckoning with the wreckage of neoliberalism that has been repudiated sort of across the board here and around the world, by the way. You have a moment where Bernie and AOC have never been more popular, not just with the original Bernie base, but with the broader Democratic Party. You have a really clear reckoning with oligarchy, which has been made, abundantly evident by the Trump administration and Elon and Doge and the tech right, and having all of those oligarchs behind him at the inauguration, and the way that so much of their policy is driven towards providing for the billionaire class. You also have this reckoning with AI coming, where these people are trying to become the first trillionaires and eliminate like half of the jobs. And into this marches effectively what appears to me to be basically like a rebranding of neoliberalism to say, oh no, this is new and different, but really try to preserve the status quo. And that's where, I think evidence for this in terms of the way it's being used is by how eagerly it's being accepted by the Richie Torreses of the world, by the entire Senate Democratic caucus, and the establishment Democratic figures who are most comfortable with trying to preserve the status quo.
Yeah, and I think that I'll offer you kind of a rubric here. So you should know that when I was sort of giving my pitch for abundance, I wasn't saying, and we need to get America back to growth. Growth is the key thing. Growth, 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 growth. You'll kind of hear that from sort of like the right wing, like tech billionaire crowd here. That is like the version of abundance, which is basically just like a substitute for like neoliberalism, just
It's
a substitute for
deregulate
like rehashed
and,
1990s. And so like that is a key thing that I really should like offer here. But let's go back to the Zoran conversation. What I love about abundance, and this is like the key thing, we're going to talk about this poll in a second, but there's a poll out there by Demand Progress that revealed that abundance messaging is far less popular when you're not door knocking for voters than a more like populist centric pitch. So I think that's fine. Like that is not a shocker. Like if you are running for office right now, you should not be talking about bottlenecks and like the fact that like our NEPA laws have made it so permitting doesn't like that is not the pitch. The pitch is that like Elon Musk is like literally killing kids in Africa. He's cutting your grandmother off of Social Security so a bunch of like 18-year-old, dudes can like play around and pretend they're like new dealers or something like that. Like that is what you are talking about right now. And to your point about Zoran, you're also talking about like housing and affordability, like actual, not just like housing in the abstract, but like actually like I am meeting you as a voter and I'm recognizing the number one thing you're worried about right now is how truly precarious American life is right now. So like that is what the actual like electoral pitch is. But what abundance should be in response to voters not being jazzed about bottleneck reforms is a toolkit to help politicians actually think through how freaking complicated and difficult it is to navigate this country. So back when I was first getting into policy, if you're talking about people, talking to people about housing, we just say like, yeah, like rent control, or like let's just like kind of do that. Abundance expands the set of policies in a bigger direction. So it says, okay, Zoran, so like I'm not going to convince Zoran in any way whatsoever that rent control isn't what like New Yorkers are demanding or what wouldn't be a form of delivery for his base. But what I could offer with the abundance toolkit is, but hey, we really should also build more housing because there's a real gap and shortage of housing. And yes, there are 2 million New Yorkers who want rent control, but there's also like other New Yorkers who don't have apartments right now in the first place and need apartments to actually exist in the first place. So my real and the good news here too is
which he embraces.
Yeah, and so great. Right, that is what yes and looks like. And once again, yes and should also be rooted in that Kamala Harris poll and ad thing we talked about earlier, where it's like voters love more housing. Talk about the New Deal era. Like, what did Harry Truman do after he comes into office? There was a housing shortage in America once all the GIs came back. We built more housing. Like, this is something we have to be able to do in this country. So we're gonna have to come up with a broad mix of doing these different things. I think part of the issue too of abundance, like kind of Ezra and Derek are pundits. Like that is their job. Like if you're a pundit, you know this. Like you have to make your argument, dial it up to 120%, and advance the argument. So they, in their argument, really focus this on the deregulatory story. The reason why I went back to the New Deal story in terms of my telling of abundance is more just that we should be focused at this point in the conversation, or let me put it this way, because people can have whatever conversations they want. We should root our abundance conversations when we're trying to engage between like the center and the left in objectives and then work our way backwards rather than just sort of saying, hey guys, guess what? Deregulation is the answer to all of your problems. Right. You're not going to agree with that. What I want you to agree with me here, and I suspect you will, is we need to approach housing through a bunch of different vectors.
Yes.
Rent control is not going to solve everything. That's your concession. I'm going to concede that if we magically also, we're not going to magically just relax zoning across the country because it's incredibly unpopular. Ironically enough, even with moderate centrist voters, I live in the Texas suburbs. I promise you, and this is also why the centrist abundance project is going to run into a weird place. I promise you, my centrist Texas voters definitely would they're down for the moderate on social and cultural issues part. They are not down for a mass YIMBY deregulatory program that fundamentally transforms the suburbs. So we're both going to have to make some sort of concession here and build an approach together. And that starts with recognizing, wow, we need to get more housing for people and make housing more affordable. That's a bunch of different approaches.
I agree with all of that. When you read the book, that is not actually the message of the book. And I think one of the things that has been useful to me in listening to the realignment is helping to understand, okay, the book is not the entirety there are different factions here, and the book is not the entirety of the movement. But, when we were talking about narratives before, the narrative of the book is that there were these liberal do-gooders who put a bunch of regulations in place, well-intentioned, that have outserved their usefulness and need to go. And a lot of this becomes very squishy because there are difficult moral choices involved in, pushing to the side any of these, regulations or any of the interest groups involved in what Ezra Klein calls everything bagel liberalism. So he never wants to actually say and that's why we shouldn't use prevailing wage standards, right? Or that's why we shouldn't require childcare as part of building these projects, or that's why we shouldn't do environmental review, or that's why we shouldn't have these air protections to make sure that when we do build public